The question to you is, how has this virus impacted the healthcare system in the last 10 months globally?
Of course. Dr. Bagai very nicely really explained the fact that the entire world as we knew it has changed. And this virus has had an impact which is incomparable, right? In terms of impact on global health, on society, as well as the economy. Life as we knew it has changed. Medical practice as we knew it has changed. I'm not a clinician, so I'm just talking on behalf of, the research that we do and my personal views. But significant efforts have been done to tackle this, from a diagnosis, treatment, vaccine, and development, of management of this disease. And I would say that the pharma industry has been very, very busy to tackle this. And I'd like to talk about this a little bit more on from the view of clinical trials, if I may, because that's what the industry has been very busy with, and that's what we are seeing, the fruits of it come about. 200 plus products being repurposed, developed independently in partnership, multiple clinical vaccines going clinical trials, 20 plus in phase 3. This has been the fastest development of a vaccine within 9 months. The earliest, which you can compare, was I think mumps, which took about 4 years. To give you perspective, average it takes about 10 to 15 years. And the amount of expenditure that is made on bringing a vaccine or any product to market is close to, I would say, $2.6 million. So you are really looking at an industry which has put all its might, prioritized the development of a COVID vaccine. And of course, this has been possible, and I think Dr. Bagai mentioned it in some ways, is intensive prioritization, intensive funding, and a lot of collaboration across the industry, because obviously, this impact has been felt from practice to the way we are living, to the way, it's a beast that we just didn't know anything about.
Thank you. Ms. Deval, the question to you is that, this particular period also has a lot of innovation in terms of healthcare and all worldwide. And what exactly are the kind of trends that you have witnessed worldwide and in India specifically, both generally and specifically? What are the trends, and how, if you look at India coping when you compare it to countries in the West, countries that are being devastated by coronavirus? Our numbers are also very high. What are your views on this?
So I can talk to you about some of the trends that we have seen globally, and I think a lot of them will also, resonate very much in India as well. And this is based, we conducted a survey both in the US as well as in India. This was around the November timeframe, and we spoke to a cross-section of physicians to get exactly their view, right? What trends are you seeing? What innovation are you seeing? And I'll talk to you about 2-3 so that I can hand over to the rest of the panelists also. And one big trend that we did notice was digital health. And this has 2 parts to it, right? This has got your telehealth, virtual health, and there is biometric monitoring. And I'm talking about this globally, and telehealth absolutely with respect to India as well. It's been around for a while. It has really come to age during the pandemic, and some of it has also been forced adoption to a large extent, right? 100% of the physicians that we spoke to were practicing telehealth. A lot of them had, constraints. It doesn't work when I have to touch and feel. It doesn't work in certain specialties. That said, 70% did say it's here to stay. Does the infrastructure around it need to improve? Because, there are benefits, right? Access to a specialist, no travel time, follow-ups after the initial consult, ability to provide quality and timely healthcare in remote areas. Great benefits. Does e-prescription need to improve? Yes. Does bandwidth, internet need to improve? Yes, but that's a separate conversation. Then there is the whole biometric monitoring using wearables to be able to, report patient data, self-report patient data. We saw a second trend was a lot of home care, whether it was blood transfusion, whether it was testing, whether it was collection of samples, whether it was, mobile units for CT scans. That was another trend, which I think is pretty much here to stay. And another one really to me is artificial intelligence and health data. And I mean, a Canadian startup, Blue Dot's algorithm shifted through tons of data initially and connected animal breakout, airline data, new reports, patient data to talk about an outbreak in China, Wuhan, way before it happened. Artificial intelligence in healthcare to analyze, monitor, screen patients, resource allocation is pretty much another trend which is here to stay. A lot of data is going to be generated and is expected to grow exponentially in the post-COVID world. And we together really have to figure out how to make sense. India specific, one big thing which we came out was electronic medical records and the need. I mean, when I talk trends, I also talk opportunities, right? And what is needed for this healthcare system. Yes, it exists in the bigger cities, and there are networks of hospitals which are now completely making all patient records electronic. But think about this: the inability to access central medical records leads to a delay in treatment, especially in terms of emergencies when doctors need to respond to their patient, depend on their families for comprehensive medical records. Patients are not willing to share sometimes because of social pressures. This to me is a trend plus a need of the hour, pretty much. And then there are larger trends, cashless transactions, there are, partnerships, all of those are other trends. But these to me are the top ones which came out from our conversations with physicians as well.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
So actually, if I can piggyback on what Dr. Bagai just said, and I think he made some very good points. Some of the questions which get raised constantly is, how did this come about in 9 months, right? And because it came about so quickly, is it safe? Is it going to be effective, right? So based on some of the research and conversations that we've had, really 3 points that I wanted to bring about, and the reason why and how this could have been done so quickly. I said 9 months. 3 things. Prioritization of the COVID-19 vaccine like nothing that we have seen in the recent years, right? It was a global crisis. Everybody has rolled up their sleeves to attack this one vaccine development. I might have mentioned this, 100,000 plus clinical trials by May last year and 150 treatments being tested within a period, that quick a period. Second thing which I want to really talk about is funding. R&D as a process is marked by substantial risk, high expenditure. Many products which are started fail to come to a marketed to a marketed product or marketed drug, right? 15 to 20 years, average cost of a clinical trial, you're looking at $19 million. Many governments, organizations, nonprofits funded it, made advance commitments to buy this, which kind of sets off some of those expenses that are being incurred. You're looking at EU, 1,400 doses were committed, US, 800 doses were advance commitments, which really helps bring things up to speed. And the last very important point is collaboration. You saw the industry collaborate. I mean, compounds were donated which had the potential to treat COVID and which had been tested in viral pathogens in the past, like Ebola and HIV. Bayer donated 3 million of Resocin, which is chloroquine, I think, which was used in the treatment of malaria when they started talking about that as a potential treatment. Pharma companies started to check their research portfolios for potential treatments. I mean, BMS, GSK, looked and made available some of these, molecules available for collaboration and testing. So I think we need to keep in mind that this had the might of a lot of people, a lot of funding, and like a global effort to bring it to where we are today.
Yeah, Ms. Deval, is it a similar strategy being adopted globally? And what about in terms of pricing? Would you say that Indian vaccines have a huge advantage in terms of, it can actually really help our manufacturing base in terms of healthcare products and vaccination. So what is your experience about it?
So I think the strategy is absolutely right, what Dr. Parikh pointed out. And I think that is pretty much the strategy which is being used globally, because he's right. It isn't about mass vaccination, and that is not even going to be possible. And plus, there are people who don't believe in vaccination, who are anti-vaccine. You have that entire population. Now, that's a completely different story, right? But yes, it is about protecting the most vulnerable. It is about rolling the vaccine out there. In the US, I know that higher number of doses have been rolled out. The actual vaccination is still proving to be a challenge for a variety of reasons, right? The Pfizer vaccines, the Moderna vaccines have, especially the Pfizer one, has a need for refrigeration, which does not allow it to be portable. In those terms, probably the India vaccine is better. I'm not well equipped to tell you which one should be better and which one should be worse. Cost wise, again, obviously, the price point for the two vaccines in India is so much more palatable than the ones which are being proposed out here. Now it comes down to both affordability, who is going to take on the financial burden of those vaccines. And now those are the other things which are coming up to be addressed.
Okay. Dr. Deval, Ms. Deval, the question is that how do you see the healthcare and pharmaceutical industry developing post-COVID? Post-COVID, and when I'm talking about post-COVID, I'm not saying that COVID is cured, but are we in a better position to tackle such outbreaks in the future?
Hard question. I don't know if I can talk simply from perspective of the pharmaceutical industry, but I think as anybody working in the healthcare space, I think your question is how can we do better, correct? That's your question. It's like, how can we do better, and what else should we be doing going forward? So I think I can talk to this from a personal perspective, and from what I understand of this space is that despite SARS and Spanish flu and all of it, I think we were very ill prepared for COVID. And to handle a future pandemic, going forward, we really need to think about what this pandemic has taught us and what can be improved, right? The few things which come to my mind is, one is collaboration. And I think we've all spoken about this in the past, is the COVID has really taught us how flat this world is. And no plan, it is impossible to close borders, and it is no way that we can do any planning isolated. I think any planning for the future and any initiatives will have to have an element of collaboration globally, and then personalized it for the country, because every country has its own challenges with respect to their political, social, economic, etc. status. Any plan also needs to have multiple parties in it, right? The government officials, public health experts, and then the people. You need a clear strategy. You need trust in that strategy to work. And then you need open communication, transparency. And then you need an implementation plan and people to commit to that agenda. Because if different factions of the people have different ideas and are going to be doing their own thing, no strategy is going to work going forward. And a big personal thing for me is a focus that we collectively have to take on preventive health. I think this pandemic has shown us that people with preconditions and underlying comorbidities have deadlier consequences, starting with the basics, right? Sanitize, mask, social distancing. I mean, it's gaining more acceptance now, and hopefully this is something which we will continue to practice even after we move to a more normal lifestyle, whatever that normal might look like. And maybe with these continued practices, we can also help eradicate other respiratory diseases. So I think, to me, those are like kind of the bigger threads. And then there are others, right? There is inequalities, it's access to health, it's access to physicians, and all of those are your other underlying themes, which we really need to start thinking about as we are going forward.
Okay, final question to both of you. How long can we expect this vaccination to provide us with immunity? Is it lifelong? And of course, question to Dr. Parikh, how as doctors, are they now better prepared to tackle God forbid, future any such pandemics?
Interesting question. So, one thing that we have to remember is every single one of us who are here today are here because our ancestors survived the pandemic. So there have been many pandemics in the past. We made it through it. We will be through this pandemic. Of course, there's going to be a huge human toll, but there will also be future pandemics. So it's really important that we're ready for those. Experience, as they say, is the best teacher. So we've been through this in our lifetimes, and hopefully that experience teaches us. When you look at the parts of the world that have done really well, they've had to deal with outbreaks before. Like they've had to deal with SARS, MERS, avian influenza scares. So they were prepared. They had a political apparatus and a population that were well acquainted with pandemic response. We have that now. We're ready. I think we will be better ready. People know how they have to behave when this happens again, and so does the political and the healthcare infrastructure. I think we've also scaled out a lot of other things that were lacking in India. For example, molecular labs across the country. That's going to benefit us for tuberculosis, influenza, for a lot of other things. But ultimately, unless you build robust public health infrastructure, even if you're experienced, you're not going to be able to respond. So I think with this pandemic, the government has realized we need to prioritize healthcare. We need to prioritize public health. When you just think about it, the amount of money we spend on our military and on our armed forces, not to say that that's not important, I'm just trying to contextualize. Think about the number of deaths, suffering, and economic loss because of a pandemic. So surely we should also spend at least somewhere in that same vicinity on our biosecurity. So that it comes down to a lot of that. About the other question, how long will immunity last? So there is some early work to suggest that following natural infection, there are the markers of long-lasting immunity, that is memory cells. And that indicates that immunity could last long. So if you look at SARS, immunity lasts at least 17 years because that's, how long, 18 years, how long back SARS occurred. But if you look at other coronaviruses, like the common cold coronavirus, people can get reinfected several times. What happens is actually this is a measure of how much the virus is spreading. So every time the virus replicates, it multiplies in a host, it has a chance to mutate or undergo recombination, to ressortment. And when you give it millions or billions of opportunities to do this, then you have new variants of the virus that emerge. And when viruses are just trying to spread and replicate, so they have an evolutionary pressure to be able to beat the immune response. So a lot of this is actually unknown. Like how quickly are we going to be able to roll out the vaccines? How quickly are we going to be able to stop giving the virus a chance to evolve, to break the chains of transmission? We manage to do that, then our vaccines may last longer. But if things continue the way that they currently are, where there are pockets of the world, and keep in mind, it's not just India, right? Because ultimately, if what we call an immune escape variant, something that can escape the immune response, emerges in one part of the world, it can spread to India and beat the vaccines here. So the way things are currently going, I think it's likely we're going to have to keep updating vaccines. I don't know how often, hopefully not too often, but it's possible that this is going to become what we call an endemic virus, something that stays with us, and we are going to have to update our vaccines every once in a while.
Okay, we are almost out of time. Quick question to Ms. Deval. Is the pharmaceutical industry R&D equipped enough to what exactly Dr. Parikh talked about? We have to keep updating our vaccines because considering the mutation that is happening. So is work going on? Are we looking at, is that industry looking towards that?
I mean, I'm pretty sure the industry is looking towards it. I mean, this was something which caught everybody by surprise, but I think the last 9 months have taught us that this is a continuing effort. This is a continuing funding. This is a continuing collaboration. So, even with the mutations, it's not something that is not is unexpected. I mean, even with the common flu that I take an annual shot for every year since I've lived here. I mean, every year there is a new strain of flu, and then there is, vaccine development, or there are flu shots which are given towards it. So it's not something which is going to catch anybody by that much of a surprise going forward. And I think the industry as a whole is cognizant of this fact and working towards it. Hey, I'm a realistic, but I'm a positive person. So, yes, it's here to stay, and yes, we all deal with it together.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for attending this. I mean, it was really educative for me, and I'm certain for the others also listening to us. I think we can end the session here, I guess.
Thank you very much for having us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.